I've always tried to explain the ending of Berserk by comparing it to The Empire Strikes Back. Empire is undoubtedly a dark film, and it leaves you hanging on, wondering what's going to happen to the characters. Very rarely does a film end with a cliffhanger, unless you're a planned movie trilogy. We had to wait 3 years, but eventually we got Return of the Jedi, and we discovered that all of our favorite characters lived happily ever after. It's been 10 years, and I'm still waiting for a happy ending to Berserk. At this point, I'd accept an ending, period. Americans are certainly more comfortable when presented with their fairy tale happy endings, but especially in today's cinema, I feel we've become just as accepting when not everything goes as planned. But at least those movies have an ending. It may not be all sunshine and roses, but damn it, there's closure. The Berserk anime ends very abruptly, with a massive tragedy that is almost never explained and with no sign of a continuation. It was as if the creators were in the middle of a great series and then suddenly suffered a massive heart attack or a brain embolism. Television culture is different in Japan in that television series generally aren't guaranteed a follow-up season. Television shows are actually more like films, in that a follow-up or a sequel is typically only made if there's genuine interest. Even then, the next season may not come around for several years. Many Berserk fans waited around for years after the initial show ended, hoping that Oriental Light and Magic would begin adapting the manga, and thus continuing where the series left off. That's why it was so disheartening to realize that although we would get new Berserk films, they would essentially be rehashing the same story. Going into the third film, I knew that the material was going to be immensely dark. If you thought the second film ended badly, rest assured, it only goes downhill from here. I'm not talking about the quality of the film. In many ways, this final installment is what sticks with people the most. It's the most heartless, gut-wrenching part of the entire Berserk universe, and acts as a bridge between the uplifting Golden Age arc and the downtrodden, often depressing world of the manga as it exists today. Remember, when the anime first came to the States in 2003, Dark Horse hadn't published the manga overseas yet. Most of us getting into the series didn't know that there was this whole world that existed in comic form. The Golden Age arc is simply a fraction of a much larger story, and surprisingly, for being simply backstory, it's the most captivating part. I've theorized that Kentaro Miura did his job too well when creating it. You would think he would have maybe devoted a couple of issues to the backstory, but the Golden Age arc lasts through 10 full graphic novels, nearly a third of the entire saga. The most confusing factor of this whole dilemma is the Golden Age arc, for the most part, is told as if it's an engaging medieval war fantasy. It isn't really until the last act that it becomes what it truly was meant to be, goth horror. The thing is, there is no transition period. We simply don't see it coming. Or don't we? In the very first episode of the show, we're introduced to Guts when he's the Black Swordsman, going around saving innocent village girls from barbaric bullies and slaying demon apostles. Throughout the show, we're given little hints about an ethereal world, such as Guts' confrontation with Azad and Griffith's Bailet. However, the show never follows these little side stories all the way through, at least not conventionally. They make appearances, popping up for an episode or two, and then we don't hear from them again, until the very end. Whenever I sit down a friend to watch this part of the anime or the movie, they never know what to think. It takes them off guard all the time, and the final scenes are so powerful that they will probably haunt you for several days afterward. It definitely made me rewatch the entire anime over and over again, so I could desperately find clues that explained all of it. Now that I'm a little more familiar with the world of Berserk, the manga in particular, I understand the role this all played in the scheme of things. But again, there are a lot of people who haven't read the manga and only have the films and the show to rely on. And with a series that contains 37 volumes with more on the way, how can you blame them? I had to get that out of the way before I dived in, because this is pure and simply the most demonic, sadistic anime I've ever watched. And if you're going to follow the story through to its conclusion, there's nothing that can prepare you. As the third film opens, we get a brief flashback that involves Griffith as a carefree child, chasing down his dream as he pursues a looming castle. The only thing standing in his way is a large silhouette, who we assume is Guts. We're then taken to a dungeon where we see an insanely thin, undernourished, and utterly broken man writhing in agony, waiting to die. Recognize the helmet? Remember the last scene of film 2? When we last saw Griffith, he was getting the living snot beaten out of him for sleeping with the princess. Let me set the record straight. Yes, this is Griffith after a full year of torture, and his situation will not change. This is pretty much the end of the line. Doesn't it just bring a sense of joy to your heart? In his delirium, Griffith gets a visit from Satan's sperm, I guess, who pay tribute to him before he gets a vision from another dimension. At this point, we assume these are simply illusions coming from a broken man. We find the Band of the Hawk, led by a battle-fatigued Casca, reverted back to their common mercenary days, hiding out in the woods as Midland continues to pursue them. In the middle of the night, they get attacked by a band of cunning assassins, led by the Kushan warrior Salat. As the assassins mercilessly go to town on the Hawk, Salat corners Casca, about to give her a really intense makeover. As he counts down her fate, who should come to the rescue but Guts,
Here I come to save the day.
who blocks Salat's deadly attacks before the assassin gets away. This is one of the aspects of the anime that was sorely missing from the film. There's a 1-year gap between the second and third films. In that time frame, Griffith was tortured and left for dead, the Hawks were disbanded, and Guts pretty much wandered the countryside looking for more people to fight, trying to expand on his skills. He spent a lot of time at Goto's, an old blacksmith possessing years of experience and who we discover tempers Guts' sword whenever it breaks. Goto also lives with his young granddaughter Erica, who only gets a small cameo in the film. There's an entire episode dedicated to Guts finding himself, where he continues to train at Goto's hut.
Goto, how did you decide to become a blacksmith?
I like seeing sparks.
They have all been illuminated by sparks.
The best part of all this, of course, is when a soldier approaches Goto and asks him to make a bunch of swords so they can go after a troop of bandits.
Bandits, brigade of... Band of the Hawk. Ah!
What's that? What did you just say?
This is where Guts decides to leave retirement, making his grand entrance that much more dramatic when he shows up to lend a helping hand.
Look alive, Commander.
For the sake of time, the film sidesteps this year, and Guts simply shows up incidentally, so it's almost like he never left. Once the battle with Salat is over, Guts follows Casca into a clearing, where Casca tries to kill him. She's furious at Guts for leaving, and blames their poor fortune on his abandoning Griffith, which confuses Guts because he thought Griffith stood on his own 2 feet. With Casca finally landing her killer blow, she suddenly realizes what she's done and decides to end it all.
でももういい。私疲れちゃった。あとはお前がやれ。
As she begins to fall into the abyss, again, Guts reaches out and saves her. Again. The two actually have sex in an intimate scene that mirrors the Griffith-Charlotte sex scene from the last film. It's slightly awkward, and to a point, it's damn near primal. It starts off somewhat passionate, and then Guts just starts hammering away. And I'm sorry, but Guts' facial expressions here are just humorous. The two fall asleep, only for Guts to wake up to a cold, bitter environment, and to be greeted by the Skull Knight. Aside from his badass design, it's a relief to finally see this character in animated format. He's an integral part to the story, this section especially, and the anime series skimped out on him completely, hence one of the reasons we didn't get much closure to begin with. He never says much, but usually shows up to offer Guts some piece of cryptic advice. As soon as he disappears, the scenery goes back to normal, leaving everything all hunky-dory again. Finding a shortcut into the castle, Judo, Pippin, Guts, and Casca execute their plan to rescue Griffith. Led by Princess Charlotte, they eventually find Griffith's chamber and are understandably taken aback by what they see. They get imprisoned by the torturer, who, after revealing all of the violent details in regards to Griffith's incarceration, displays Griffith's tongue as his prize. This doesn't sit well with Guts, who repays the favor by turning the torturer into a live shish kebab. Under attack by the guards, Guts simply loses it and runs up the stairs, cutting down anything in his path. The king sends out more guards to chase after them, and after a brief chase through the streets, the Midland army crosses paths with the rest of the Hawks.
一度やってみたかった。
While Guts gets Griffith to safety. With Griffith back in the camp, the Hawks are excited about the upbeat possibility of a fresh start, until Judo and Casca give them the latest update. Deciding on their fates, the vast majority of the Hawks decide to follow Guts wherever he goes. To be honest, I would have been fine with the story ending right here. It isn't a completely happy ending, what with Griffith in his dire condition, but it would have ended with some semblance of hope. Casca and Guts are in love, the Hawks make Guts their leader, and Guts finally finds what it was he was looking for all these years, which is really just simple companionship. Alas, in Miura's world, there are no happy endings. Whereas the first film was largely Guts' story, and the second belonged more or less to Casca, this film focuses mainly on Griffith. Griffith has a destiny, and honestly, it doesn't stop here. But in Griffith's condition, how would anyone expect him to recover? Well, this is where it gets weird. But honestly, to answer that question, you have to go above and beyond the human plane of existence, which Griffith does. Out of the blue, Griffith simply decides that he's laid dormant long enough, and that it's time to keep moving toward his dream. He manages to take control of his horse, and as he envisions his castle, he loses control of his carriage and is literally thrown into a lake. He attempts suicide and fails, when, after taking a plunge of defeat in the water, he finds his baylet. This scene of Griffith dangling the baylet out in front of him has become something of an iconic image, and was even used in one of the theatrical posters for the film. As Guts and Casca give chase, they notice that Griffith is now surrounded by hordes of disturbing zombie-like creatures while sitting in the shadows of an eclipse, the one event that triggers everything about to happen. At one point while watching this, I was expecting the camera to pull back, revealing Bugs Bunny as he influences the scenery before saying, "Ain't I you stinking?" As Guts approaches Griffith, Griffith almost tries to dissuade him from making contact. This is pivotal. The scene slows to a halt. Guts touches Griffith, and before we know it, Griffith's baylet is screaming, like it's a living creature. The world literally transforms around them, and before we know it, Guts, Casca, and the rest of the Hawks are riding their horses into hell. Literally, it's hell. Welcome to the world of Berserk. Casca demonstrates her fierce resolve by attempting to organize the Hawks even as the very fabric of reality crumbles around them, while Guts watches in complete admiration. The demon things begin to chant, and within moments we're introduced to the God Hand, the four angels who influence fate. There's Slan, Ubik, Conrad, and Void, the apparent leader who possesses a keen interest in causality. They all seem to share a fascination with Griffith, as they reveal to the Hawks that essentially, if Griffith wishes it, the entire band will be sacrificed so that Griffith can become one of them. This isn't a dream or some abstract prophecy. The cards are on the table, take it or leave it. This is what the story of Berserk has become. All of these characters we've come to know and admire, who have come so far to achieve victory, have just ended up on a platter in order to serve demonkind. But what about Griffith? According to the God Hand, Griffith has to make the decision to sacrifice them. He wouldn't sacrifice his own men to fulfill his dream, would he? After all, wasn't he in a way forging a path so all of them could enjoy his glory together? Well, this is where we realize that Griffith's loyalty hangs on a thread. It might be different if he weren't a broken mess and clinging on to the last remnants of life, but in his current state, Griffith has no future. He has to make a powerful decision. If he enters demonhood, he can continue serving his dream. It just means that he's going to have to continue to add to the body count. The God Hand's purpose is to show Griffith his past and give him a slight push toward his destiny. They influence his decision by making parallels to his childhood, showing him the horrors of war and how, regardless of his feelings for the Hawks, he essentially used them to service his dream. They're demons with the tempting sales pitch, and Griffith seems to be taking the bait hook, line, and sinker. There are genuine moments where Griffith tries to warn Guts, and at one point even attempts to save him when he falls to his doom. But in between the time it takes for Guts to climb his way back up the decrepit hand, and for Griffith to be shown his destiny, Griffith comes to realize one thing. And because of Guts, Griffith decides to sacrifice everyone. Yeah, I think this is the point in the story where we can call Griffith the villain. The Hawks are then branded, marked as sacrifices for the horde of demon apostles surrounding them. Griffith goes into a cocoon like an evil mogwai from Gremlins, as Guts is forced to watch as his comrades are torn apart by demons. The next few minutes are simply chaos. Pippin and Judo sacrifice themselves to protect Casca, Corcus succumbs to the charms of a demonic naked woman with big breasts, and everyone else is eaten alive, with their body parts flailing about like they were crumbs. Griffith undergoes his transformation, while Guts does what he's always done best. Simply survive. The God Hand watches on, impressed that a mere mortal can survive so long. The demons get pretty nasty with Guts. When he's the last man standing, they corner him and display the heads of his dead comrades. Then they hold him down as Griffith emerges as the newest member of the God Hand, a winged creature called Femto. Guts is helpless as an unconscious Casca is lowered in front of Griffith, where he proceeds to graphically rape her. Guts does everything in his power to escape and finally resorts to pulling a saw or an ash, whichever you prefer, slicing off his own arm to break free. He makes a mad dash for Griffith, who apparently can control space and time with merely a thought. Griffith continues to defile Casca as Guts is once again held down, with one of the demons piercing Guts' right eye. The reason why so many fans were angered with the anime series was that it ended right here. This was the very last scene of the series. Going back to The Empire Strikes Back, imagine if the movie ended with Princess Leia bent over a table, Darth Vader penetrating her with his dark side, as stormtroopers hold down Han Solo, forcing him to watch. Luke's and Chewbacca's sliced-up corpses are slumped over a sabacc table off in the corner when the film simply goes to credits. Interesting image aside, that's exactly what the anime did. Thankfully, this is one of the ways the films surpassed the series. The ending isn't any happier, but we at least find out what happens to the characters. If you noticed, Rickard wasn't anywhere to be seen. That's because when all this was happening, Rickard was on a quest and didn't enter the eclipse. He stumbles into a tornado, which is how a human would view the eclipse on Earth, and sees a confusing image of the Skull Knight taking on Zod. Inside the eclipse, Griffith continues his assault on Casca when the Skull Knight penetrates the astral plane, effortlessly slaughters a bunch of demons, and rescues Casca and Guts as he evades the God Hand. Void then declares that with the coming of the fifth God Hand, the world will succumb to the Dark Ages. So basically, this entire story arc was just a big history lesson. Joking aside, Guts wakes up at Godo's home, even though there's no Godo in this version, and finds that he somehow survived all that. He goes to meet up with Casca, who doesn't recognize him and is actually petrified of him. Casca goes to run to little Erica in terror, and actually seems to possess the mind of a child now. This causes Guts to reflect on their time together, and he runs through the land like a madman as he reminisces about the Band of the Hawk. When night falls, Guts gets attacked by evil spirits who try to possess his body. The Skull Knight appears and essentially tells him that his whole purpose in life is to struggle, and that life's pretty much going to suck now because he carries the brand, forever marking him as a sacrifice. Guts takes the Skull Knight's sword and wards off the demons. The film ends with Guts staring off into the sunset. But wait! In traditional Marvel movie fashion, we get a post-credit scene where Guts suits up and enters the New World as the Black Swordsman. As of now, there hasn't been an animated feature or series that tells us what happens after the eclipse. Unless you count the pilot episode of the show, which really doesn't explain that much. Supposedly, Studio 4C is working on more films that will cover that aspect of the manga, but I've been waiting for 10 years. I'll believe it when I see it. Berserk struck me, and many fans, with a profound feeling of wonder and sadness. It was as if Kentaro Miura dangled these great characters in front of us as a tease, only to take them away in a brutal fashion. It's a fantastic story, but it's been described as giving the viewer a severe case of blue balls. There's so much build-up, and when we finally get to the eclipse, everything that we witnessed is completely meaningless. To this day, fans are all over the internet, reading fan-made translations and downloading scans of the manga to avoid paying for the highly priced books. But hey, if they weren't so entranced by the story, they wouldn't bother, so that's saying something. I'm telling you right now, as I've said throughout this whole retrospective, do yourselves a favor and find the show. Then watch the movies. The Sopranos, Dexter, Game of Thrones, and Berserk. Yes, it's of that same caliber. Treat yourself to a little magic. And madness.